I am Curran Bhatia, and this is Ask the Experts. We have a great group of guests as always, but before we get into that, thoughts and prayers up for Errol Spence Jr. He was involved in a car accident. The latest reports are looking okay. It says Errol did not sustain any broken bones or fractures. He has some facial lacerations, but he is expected to make a full recovery. Also, thoughts and prayers to James Ali Bashir. He's the trainer of Ivana Habazin, who was a guest on the previous episode. There was an altercation at the weigh-in. James Ali Bashir was taken to the hospital. He was released, but then he was sent back due to brain bleed, and he is in his advanced age. So thoughts and prayers to him. I emailed with Ivana. She said, I hope it's okay. It's really bad. I haven't heard confirmed latest reports, but I've heard that James is texting people. He's hopefully back to sorts now. I sent him a note and he did text back, so let's hope that he is able to also make a full recovery. With that said, let's talk about today's show. Speaking of someone who put themselves in danger, went through some wars, his nickname was The Gladiator, and that's for a reason. John Molina, and he has decided to call it a career. He fought everybody in the division. He fought Adrian Broner, Terrence Crawford, Ruslan Provodnikov, Lucas Matisse, on and on and on. He has a very impressive resume. You know what's more impressive? The way he fought. He was an ultimate come-forward fighter. He never shied away from the challenge, and he's calling it a day, and he's going to share why. He's going to share some great war stories from over the years, his motivation for retiring, and he's going to talk about what is next for him. After that, I will be speaking to Marcos Villegas. We just had the Errol Spence versus Shawn Porter fight. It was very, very competitive. It was a tough fight, and it was very, very hard to judge. You did not want to be a judge that night because there were very close rounds. Well, Marcos was actually the unofficial scorer for the broadcast, and we're going to talk to him about his process. How do you score such a close fight? We're also going to look back at the fight in general. In Spence Porter, we're going to look back at Golovkin-Derevyanchenko. And I'm going to get Marcus's picks for the biggest fights this year. And I asked him how it was on the other end of some interviews that went wrong. He interviewed Keith Thurman, who went off on him for saying that he felt that Pacquiao beat Jeff Horn. Marcos also had the rough and contentious interview with Angel Garcia, father of Danny Garcia, who can always be outspoken, and he kind of went off on Marcos. So I asked him, what is it like to be on the other side of that? And we spoke about more topics in the world of boxing in my wide-ranging interview with Marcus. After that, we just had the Anthony Dirrell versus David Benavidez scrap. That was on the undercard of Spence Porter. It was a fantastic fight, but a cut opened up over Anthony Dirrell's eye. He could not continue, and there was a man who made that decision. His name is Javon Sugar Hill. He's the nephew of the great Emmanuel Stewart, and he had to make that tough decision to throw in the white flag and say, my fighter cannot continue. And I will be speaking to Sugar Hill. I'm going to ask him why he made that decision, how tough it is to make a decision like that. We're going to look back at the fight, and we're going to see who Anthony Dirrell wants to fight next. In the conversation for someone that Dirrell wants to fight next is the guy he fought before, and that's Avni Yildirim from Turkey. And we're going all the way to Turkey to chat with Avni Yildirim and his manager. I'm going to ask him about his fight with Anthony Dirrell. I'm going to ask him about what he wants. Does he want to fight David Benavidez? Does he want to fight Anthony Dirrell? And actually, Avni's promoter is going to announce Avni's next fight and opponent. It was a candid conversation with Avni Yildirim, and you're going to want to hear that. My last guest of the episode is Jay Chaudhry. He's an award-winning filmmaker. He's an ambitious guest, and he's trying to grow the sport of boxing. He's trying to do that by shaking it up a little bit. He feels like promotion in boxing is kind of stuck in the dark ages, right? The marketing, they're not taking advantage of social media and other new age channels the way they should be. So he actually is creating a documentary about this and did a social experiment during the last fight. So we're going to ask him about how that experiment went, what he found out, and how he hopes to grow the sport of boxing. So without further ado, let's get to my first guest. He had a 13-year professional career, 39 pro fights. He challenged for a world title on numerous occasions, and now he's finally hanging it up, and that deserves to be celebrated. And we should look back at some of those wars. We should talk about the stories of going up the ranks. So here is my conversation with John the Gladiator Molina. I am Curran Bhatia, and let's ask the experts. I am Curran Bhatia for the Ask the Experts podcast, talking to John Molina. John, you just fought on September 28th on the undercard of Spence Porter against Josecito Lopez. The fight didn't go your way, but much more importantly, you made the decision to call it a career. So first of all, congratulations on your career. You're 36 years old. You're 13 years as a professional. So was it tough to make that decision to walk away from the sport?
Most definitely. First and foremost, you're a fighter, but it was tough in that regard. But it made it very much easy, being the fact that I have a beautiful family that I want to enjoy after all my hard work in the professional game.
And what went through your mind? You know, was this something you'd been thinking about recently, the last few years? Was it after the Lopez fight? What kind of was the catalyst for you to say, okay, that's it, I'm done?
I believe it was a matter of mentally in the fight. I seen everything I wanted to accomplish and see everything I wanted to do, but I couldn't physically pull the trigger. So I've been in that position before, and I wanted to go into a slugfest, and I felt like my body wasn't up for the task. I don't know if that makes sense, but
you felt that you felt mentally you could keep going. Your body wasn't supporting what you wanted to do mentally, and you knew all along that when that time came, it was time to kind of walk away.
Especially at that level, absolutely, because this is a very dangerous game, and I have a beautiful family who I want to enjoy. I want to keep my, I want to be able to enjoy and have a healthy life with them. And being boxing is such a dangerous sport, especially in those recent times. We've had some, some unfortunate outings, with fighters that passed away. We're not in there having a debate. We're not in there, playing catch. We're in there fighting.
100%. And I think one thing that was great about your career is that you were always come forward. You literally were a warrior, a gladiator. You left everything on the line, always gave the fans their money's worth. Did you feel, against Lopez on September 28th, he caught you early, and he was obviously landing some shots which ended in the stoppage. Did you feel he was tougher than you expected early on in that fight?
I don't want to really get into that because I don't want to discredit Lopez. I think he's a great fighter, but I think it was all me. I don't think it was what he did. It's hard to explain at being a fighter, but again, he came out on top because, he did what he did that night. He did what he had to do, but it wasn't Lopez. It was bigger than that. It was just my body not responding. Please make sure you reiterate that that's not degrading or taking away from what Lopez accomplished that night because he's a great fighter.
100%, and that's totally understandable. That makes a lot of sense. So just looking back at your career, I was looking through your resume, and it's literally like a who's who at 140 welterweight. You fought the best fighters. When you look back, what was the most memorable fight for you? We know the Mickey Bay comeback when you were losing the fight and knocked him out in the last round. We know the War fight of the year 2014 with Matisse. You took on Terrence Crawford, who's now at the top of the sport. So when you look back at all the great fights you had, what was the most memorable for you?
Wow, it's kind of hard to put a finger on it. But, I enjoyed the victory over Provodnikov, being an 11-1 underdog. I enjoyed that victory. The Mickey Bay victory, I enjoyed that fight. What the world doesn't know is that I took that fight on 33 days notice.
Wow.
And that fight has a huge story behind it. My back was against the wall. And I had to prove to the world that it wasn't a hiccup, the loss that I had against Andrei Klimov, who was a great fighter. I don't like to disrespect any fighter, but I was supposed to win that fight. And then I fought on Mickey Bay, supposed to be his coming out party. That time when I fought Mickey Bay, he was the biggest prospect in the Mayweather camp at that point. And so we kind of derailed that train, and that was a great fight for me.
And just in that Mickey Bay fight, it's one thing. It's common in boxing to say, okay, I'm down on the scorecards. I need a knockout to win, right? Every trainer in the last round is saying that. It's one thing to say that, and then a completely different thing to actually do it, right? To be losing big time on the scorecards and come back with a knockout. So, what clicked in you in that last round? Was it mental? Was it physical? Was it both? What happened in that last round where you had to go for the knockout to win there?
It was literally coming down that fight in the opening seconds in that round. He actually hurt me to the body. If you watch back, he hurt me to the body, and I grabbed a hold of him. And in my mind, triggered and said, "I'm not going to go out like this. I'm gonna go out on my shield if need be. If we're going to fight, we're going to throw down." So I noticed that he was keeping his right hand a little low, and he was dipping his head in when he was coming in. So I knew if I threw a short left hook, I would catch him. So I snapped a jab off of his face, and I threw a little bit of a left hook and landed right on his chin. It was a little 6-inch left hook, but it was hard. And I knew he was gone after that shot because his whole body fell forward, and he had no control of his body. He was like on autopilot, if you will. And then I literally looked at the clock and saw that there was a minute left when I looked up. And I said, it's either now or never. And I threw everything and the kitchen sink twice. So I was looking at Draculich, either you're going to stop this fight or I'm going to kill this kid. And he stopped it.
That's an incredible story and an incredible fight and come from behind win. The other, like I mentioned, the fight of the year in 2014 against Lucas Matisse, who's one of the hardest punchers in boxing. You guys traded knockdowns, multiple knockdowns. At the end of the day, Matisse, won by knockout. But I've heard you say in the past that was actually one of your proudest moments. And right, that's interesting that one of your proudest moments was in a loss, but it was such a courageous effort. Is that still true? Is that one of your proudest moments? Looking back?
Most definitely. You have to remember that. You have to remember my whole career I was never given an easy path. So when I fought Lucas Matisse, that was my first fight at 140. So and at that time Matisse was the man at 140, the killer, if you will. I think he had like 33 wins, 30 by knockout, or something like that. So when I came into that fight, I knew what it was. I knew what they were trying to, I guess, feed me, if you will, to the next guy.
Right.
And when we got into the fight, in the beginning of the fight, everyone's like, "Oh, it's going to be a killing." Matisse is a killer. Molina's coming up in weight to fight at 140. But I knew once he felt my power, it would be a different ball game. In the first round, I cracked him with the right hand, I believe, and it really got his attention. The second round, I dropped him. And then he knew he was in a fight. And then it was one of those things. See, that's the moment I'm talking about. Going back and engaging Matisse into a war, my body was ready, willing, and able to go. Now, to get myself into a war with Lopez, which I believe we should have been in, my body was hesitating a little bit. Not mentally. Mentally, I was there. I wanted to.
Right.
But physically, I couldn't pull the trigger. So at that point, I knew that at that level, if I can't call on what's carried me my whole career, which is my heart, my will to win, and my punch, I knew it was going to be an uphill battle every fight.
No, 100%. And I've heard you say you heard a lot of no's before you heard yes. And it's almost like that can be said two ways in terms of your fighting style, right? You never gave up and you always went for it, but also in terms of getting the matchups and the fights that you wanted, right? So why do you think that was? Why was it more difficult for you to sometimes get the bigger names fights that you wanted?
Well, I think risk versus reward. You got to remember this is a business as well. And in the boxing community, we all know each other. And everyone knows that I hit like a ton of bricks and my will to win, and I'm always going to be in the fight. And it takes one mistake, and I'll get you out of there. Now, in the beginning of my career, my name wasn't worth what it was towards the end of my career. So, if you can take an easier fight against a less dangerous opponent, why call on John Molina when you can take someone else and get them out of there? Where if you fight John Molina, you make a mistake and he lands, it's going to be over. So I believe that was, one aspect of it. It could be the business aspect of boxing. But the other is I don't think people were too crazy to fight me. I don't think people were too excited to fight me.
Right. No, they definitely were not excited to fight you because of your come forward style, your kind of give everything gladiator attitude. The one fight I always wanted to ask you about was against Antonio DeMarco in 2012. It was a quick first round stoppage. You didn't go down in that fight, but the ref waved it off. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that stoppage because, like we said, you didn't go down, but the referee stopped it in the first round. What did you make of that?
Well, that was my learning experience. That fight was my first fight on the big stage. It was for the WBC title against someone like Antonio DeMarco, who was a great fighter. And the reason why I didn't go down is because I didn't feel I was hurt. That was a lack of inexperience on my part. Had I known, then what I know now, I would have taken a knee, lost the round, and I guarantee you that fight would have been a war, given both of us where we were at and what our heart and our will to win would be. But it proved itself in the Matisse fight, and it showed that fight, that punch really didn't hurt me. It was a lack of experience. I didn't know to take a knee at that point.
Right.
I should have taken a knee because I thought, okay, he's hitting me, and I was protecting myself, and my inexperience was telling me, okay, don't go down because you're not hurt. And then before I knew it, they waved it off. And as the ref should have waved it off because it looked like he was wailing on me. So it makes sense. His job is to protect you. But, yeah, no, it was just a lack of inexperience. But it was a learning experience. Remember, I only had 22 amateur fights.
Absolutely. And during that fight, the great Jim Lampley, one of the things he said, as DeMarco was coming on, and then you were kind of coming back before it was stopped, and he said, "Here comes Molina coming back, the only way he knows how, swinging hard with that right hand." And I'm sure you take pride in that, right? Because you were never a fighter to hold or run, right? You were a fighter. If you were in trouble, you were gonna come back by swinging hard.
Absolutely. I lived that experience in my mind as a kid all my life, that I was behind in the fight. I was going down, and I came from behind, and I won. I literally dreamed about that. It played over and over in my head when I was 10 years old. Very specifically, I can remember acting out the Matisse fight, or not the Matisse fight, the Mickey Bay fight, before I even knew it was going to happen. So it's kind of weird to say that now, but thinking back on my career, I lived every fight before it even happened in my own head, in my fantasy, if you will. This is what I wanted to do since I was a kid, be a fighter. And when I was given the opportunity, I took it as far as I could.
Absolutely. And when you look back at your great career, I mean, do you have any regrets, anything that you would have done differently when you look back?
Well, I don't know. I haven't been removed that far yet, but no, man. I think everything happened the way it was supposed to. I provided a beautiful life for my family because of boxing. I remember starting boxing at 18 years old, thinking, "Man, am I really that good? Can I really make it to that level where it's going to become my occupation to be a fighter?" I mean, because if you think about it, in the grand scheme of things, not a lot of fighters make it to a level where they're better than a club fighter, unless you're given the Olympic, you have the Olympic background, the pedigree. You've been doing it since you were 8 years old.
Right.
Remember, I started at 18 years old, so I had to take the crash course in boxing, and I had to take the clip notes and figure it out.
No, that's really interesting. And I think the fact that you were figuring things out through your career, things like you said, taking a knee and things like that, it's really interesting. And that happens when you start late. And the fact that you started at 18 years old and achieved what you did is really amazing. You challenged for a world title a couple of times, I believe 2 times, but it was elusive, right? It is a world title. It's hard to get. Any disappointment in that, and not being able to get the world title, or are you just happy that you were able to challenge for one?
Most definitely very upsetting, but water under the bridge. I look at my family, I look at my life, I look at everything I have, and to harp on something like that is petty in comparison to my beautiful family, my daughters, my wife, the lifestyle that I was able to provide for my family because of boxing. That's far more better than winning the world title. Would I have wanted to win the world title? Absolutely. Of course, you don't think I want to be a 60-year-old man carrying around that title? So that's what I did. I was the best in the world at one point. I got up to number one in the world. I got all the regional titles. I got the interim title. I just never had the world title. So, yes, in my heart, I'll probably go to the grave thinking, damn, I wanted to be a world champion. But in the grand scheme of things, when I look back at my life, I provided a beautiful life for my family. My daughters have everything they want. I have a beautiful roof over my head. I'm financially secured because of boxing. So I'm proud of what I've accomplished for starting at 18 years old. So I don't want to harp on, oh, I should have won a world title. Oh, I should have got that, or I should have did that. Life's too short to worry about the small things.
100%, and you entertained the fans. Every fight you were in, it was something that me as a fan, and I'm sure others, wanted to tune in because of your heart and the way you fought. So looking at the sport now, we talked about you being in some wars there, and we talked about fighter safety a little bit earlier. Is there anything that you would suggest, someone who was in there the way you were, to make our sport safer? Is there anything that you would say, hey, this is something that needs to be changed?
Yes and no. It's just a brutal, dangerous sport as it is. I mean, there was times where I would go to pride sites and I would sit there ringside and say, damn, is this what I do? Because it sounds brutal. And I had reporters that have been in the game for 30 years telling me that they had to turn away during the Matisse fight with me and Matisse because it sounded too brutal and it was too gruesome what we were doing to each other. They said it sounded like watermelons exploding every time we hit each other. And it is a very brutal sport, but if for 1 second any young fighter out there thinks, maybe I shouldn't do this because I might get hurt, he better stop now. Because if you ever have that thought in your mind, please, any fighter, any young man that's fighting, you do not belong in this sport. That is my number one rule from all the years of fighting that I believe makes sense about boxing. If you, for any second, have any doubt in your mind, if you're afraid of death in that ring, you do not belong in that ring at all whatsoever. And if you don't have that attitude, you do not belong. And if you do have that attitude, sign me up to fight that guy because he's going to be easy to break. And the perfect example is this. Perfect example is right here. My third pro fight, it was at the Orleans in Vegas, I believe. I could be wrong, third or fourth. It's been such a long time, and I've taken numerous punches to the head. So with that being said, we're at the Orleans, and we're at a fight. When you're a small-time guy coming up, you guys kind of share a dressing room. You don't get your own dressing room until you get up in the game and start becoming a co-main in the main event. So we're sharing a dressing room, and I'm getting ready to fight. And I watched a kid that I was sharing the dressing room with. He comes in, he's just mangled, bloody nose, cut on his face, cut on his forehead, cut on his eyes. And I looked at him, and the look on my face was a look of fear. And I'm staring, stuck at this man, looking at him, thinking, oh, shit. Excuse my language. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm looking at this man, and no more than 5 seconds later, I feel a big smack right in the back of my head. Boom! I hit on top of my head, and it hurt so bad. I looked at this guy like, who the hell hit me? It was my father. And he said, if I ever see that look on your face again, we will never come here again, and we will never fight again. He said, look at that man right there, and that is the reality of our sport. This can happen to you. If you're not okay with that, pack your stuff up and let's go home. And he snapped me out of it right away. But for a split second, I almost became a civilian, and my dad knocked it out of me.
That's a great story, and I'm looking it up here. It looks like your fourth fight, and that was in 2006 at the Orleans Hotel against Julio Chavez. That's exactly
what it was. Damn, I have a good memory.
Hey, not too bad. So with that said, and the fact that you have these stories and these moments of advice, and I know you just retired, so you're probably taking time to think about it, but what is next for you? Would you consider being a trainer and kind of passing along the lessons that you learned? Would you consider commentating? What do you want to do next?
Commentating would definitely be something in my avenue or up my alley, but also a lot of fighters that were great fighters, and believe me, I'm not calling myself a great fighter. I'll let people call me that. But a lot of fighters that were good at the sport of boxing, that doesn't always translate into being a great trainer. It's a special talent to be a good trainer. I don't know if I can offer anybody anything from training. I wouldn't want to put someone's life in my hands if I don't feel confident doing it. I don't know in what way I will lend myself back to boxing. I don't know that yet. I haven't sat down and thought about it that too deeply. But I'm sure I'll be involved some way down the road. And in a few months here or a year, I think the world will know what I'm going to do with myself with regards to career choice. And I think they'll be excited. I just don't want to unveil that information yet.
That's totally understandable. And best of luck to you with whatever you decide to do. I'm sure you will be successful. What would be your final message to your fans, your supporters? What would be the final thing you want to say to them?
I would want to say thank you so much for allowing me to show my talent, to show my heart, for allowing me to be their fighter. The greatest meme I ever read online, because us fighters do pay attention to that, was a gentleman saying, I had a hard day at work, but I called on my inner John Molina and I got through it. And to me, that meant that was amazing. When I took a picture of it, I saved it, because the fact that the fans can relate to me like that and can call on me to be an inspiration means the world to me.
Let's hope that we can
all. Thank you.
Let's hope that we can all call on our inner John Molina when we're going through any tough times. So, last question. Boxing is notorious for fighters coming out of retirement, right? So I want to know, you're obviously calling it a day, you're retiring. If there's a big offer down the line, a huge matchup, is there any chance we see John Molina in the ring? Is it a 99% retirement, or is this 100%, never again retirement?
Oh, man, it's so hard to say, but I believe that's it. When I make that decision, remember when I was telling you about the decisions making in your mind, if you're not okay with boxing, you don't belong. Being the fact that the R word has already crept in my brain, I think that I'm a different fighter because of that already. So I wouldn't want to cheat the fans. I wouldn't want to cheat myself. And I wouldn't want to cheat my family, because my daughters are old enough now to understand that what I do, I wouldn't want to put them through that. My poor wife has been doing it for my whole career, and my poor mother and father having to watch me fight all those years. I think I'm done. I think that's it. Now, if BKB, bare knuckle boxing wants to, no, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding, man.
Yeah.
But,
it's for boxing, but there's other outlets.
There is other venues. I did my thing, man. I'm proud of what I've accomplished. I'm proud of my career. I'm proud of my family. I'm thankful for the opportunity all the way from Dan Goosen to Tom Brown to Al Heyman, Sam Watson, every man that's ever given me an opportunity to display my craft. I'm very thankful for.
Well, John Molina, if it is the end, thank you for entertaining us the last 13 years, 39 pro fights, nicknamed the Gladiator, and you certainly deserve that nickname. So please enjoy retirement, and thank you again for what you've done for this sport and for entertaining us for all these years.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
That was John Molina, an always honest John Molina, and I really do hope he does become a trainer or an announcer. He has a great boxing mind, and it would be great for him to continue to share some of those life lessons that he learned on his journey in boxing. Up next, we just had the Errol Spence versus Shawn Porter scrap. It was a great back and forth fight. It was a very close fight, which is what I thought it would be, because Shawn Porter, the way he fights, he gets in your face, he makes it difficult, right? And Spence was able to eventually control that, and he landed the big knockdown in round 11, but it was a very close fight. And what happens in a close fight? Well, the judges have a tough decision. It's what do you reward, right? Are you rewarding the guy who is moving forward in your face? Are you rewarding the guy who's kind of taking a back step but is landing punches, counter punching more? It's a very tough assignment, and that's why I actually wanted to speak to Marcos Villegas because he was the PBC unofficial scorer. And the thing about being an unofficial scorer is your score gets put up on the graphic every few rounds, and a lot of people are going to scrutinize that, right? Because they're going to say, "Well, I didn't have it that way." So it's a tough job, and Marcus had to take that on, especially for a fight of this magnitude. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Marcos Villegas.
This is Curran Bhatia for the Ask the Experts podcast. I'm talking to Marcos Villegas. Marcos, I don't even know the best way to introduce you besides saying you're probably the hardest working man in television. I know you're the founder of Fight Hype, PBC unofficial scorer. I know that's just a few of the things that you do. So you had the tough assignment of unofficially scoring Errol Spence versus Shawn Porter. And I say that's tough because it was such a close fight. So going into that fight, were you a little nervous at all, saying, "Hey, I know this is going to be a close fight, and a lot of people are going to be looking at this unofficial scorecard"?
Yeah, if you ask Dan Canobio from Coffee Box, I was seated right next to him before this fight started, and I remember I looked over him and I told him, like, "Man, this fight's going to be close." Like, I was a little nervous, I was a little stressed. It's because Shawn Porter fights in general tend to be very close and very very hard to judge, and it's always a pull and tug with his fights because on one instance when you're watching him fight, he works the whole 3 minutes, regardless if it's clean punches to the head or body, or if it's just him working on the inside, either way, he's always working in there, and you always have to ask yourself the question, who did the better work? And a lot of times Shawn just outworks, over volumes his opponents, and you got to give it to him because you got to see the whole context of the round and who was doing the most work. Given the last fights that I worked for Shawn, the last one, the Ugas fight that I scored for Fox, and then the other fights in the past that I was present for in person when he fought Keith Thurman and Danny Garcia, they were all really, really close, and they were really hard to score. So, yeah, I remember when this fight was announced, I was just like, oh, great. This is going to be a really hard fight to score. And then as it got closer, I would say, it wasn't that I was nervous, but just a feeling like, man, this is going to be a really hard night of work, given how close Shawn's fights tend to be. So, yeah, it can be a little nerve-wracking when certain guys, their style, and especially, too, this is on the pay-per-view. There's a lot of eyes watching.
Right.
So, it puts a little bit more pressure on it. But, yeah, I tend to know, like, which guys will give a hard fight to score. And
sure.
Yeah, I'll be like, oh, man.
I'm sure you were looking at, Shawn Porter. You've seen him in these razor-thin fights, like you said, against other opponents. And it's always, he's going to be in your face. He's going to be in his opponent's face, and that's going to make it difficult for both yourself as an unofficial scorer and the official judges, who also have a hard assignment when it comes to a Shawn Porter fight when he's fighting quality opposition. So let me ask you this before we get into the fight a little bit. Your job as an unofficial scorer, how do you put yourself in the mindset of what a judge would score? We know a judge is supposed to look at effective aggression, ring generalship, defense, and hard and clean punching. Or do you do, Max Kellerman for a long time had the theory where he said it's almost who would you rather be, right? That's a simple way to look at it. Who would you rather have been in that round? So what is your approach to scoring a fight?
Well, I think in general, I follow the criteria of the judges, and I base it off of, how they see a fight and really, how an amateur fight is scored as well. In the amateurs, there's a lot of similar. Yeah, I know it's a point system, but what's getting you the points? Clean punches to the head and body, and then I also take into account the other things, who's doing more to win the round? Who's the one that was coming forward but landing punches? It's just not about coming forward. It's about coming forward and being effective. And that's what it means when someone says effective aggression. That's coming forward, being aggressive, but landing punches on your opponent as well. So I tend to see it more like the judges, but when it comes to like a round that is very close and like I can't decide off the bat, you know, it usually take me like a second or two. I ask myself, well, who did more to win the round? And when you look at it, I think like the clearest analogy to it would be, you know, when you're on a school playground and you see two kids fight, you know, usually the guy that had more like, oh, like type moments in the round, or when they fought on the playground, is usually the guy that's perceived to have won the fight in the schoolyard. And it's the same thing with, I think, inside the ring too. When you look at a close round and you're like, okay, well, whose punches stuck out more to me? That's usually the guy that'll get the nod.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. You have to look at it with the playground analogy, but you have to do it round by round versus, you know, in a playground where it could just be whoever did well late maybe catches your attention and you in your mind, you think they won the fight. So let's talk about the fight a little bit. Early on, you know, after round 3, you had it 29-28 for Spence. You said it could have been Porter for the same score. So obviously it was close early on. Were you surprised that it was as close as it was? Because I personally thought before this fight it was going to be extremely competitive. But a lot of people did pick Spence to win, and he was a big favorite. Were you surprised early on at how competitive Shawn Porter was?
That's a really good question. I would say no, because usually when Shawn has fought the top of his division, Porter, Garcia, Ugas, he's been really competitive. And you know, given his style, you know, the volume style is always one where it's not like gaming the system, but if you throw more punches, you're going to have a higher percentage of landing more punches. And you got to take that into account. So, you know, Shawn was doing really well, I guess, throughout the whole fight when you look at it as well. But I did expect Spence to use his distance more in box. And I was thinking that would be the way that he would approach the fight, that we knew that Shawn wasn't going to try to box with Errol, a guy who was longer and could potentially give him problems if he tried to bull rush in. But his best bet was to fight a close inside fight, and that's what Shawn did. And because he fought for many of the rounds his type of fight, that's why he was in it and did really well.
No, certainly. And I think what Shawn Porter does is it's not necessarily gaming the system. You know, years ago, Joe Calzaghe used to get.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up Joe Calzaghe.
Yeah, he used to, you know, do the
Joe Calzaghe because his punches,
the pity pat style, right?
Yeah, it wasn't the most effective.
Right.
You had to give him credit. You had to look like, hey, okay, this guy, the guy that Joe's fighting landed maybe like 4 or 5 good solid punches, but then Joe landed 80 punches that might not be the most effective. Like you have to give the round to Joe because he's active.
By sheer volume.
Yeah, exactly. You know.
And so, you know, looking at your scorecard, 86-85 for Spence through round 9. You said that it could be a draw or Porter could be winning. So it was a really close fight. That 11th round knockdown. Now, obviously, we know when you're scoring a fight, you get an extra point for the knockdown. I think what it also did is that was a close round that could have gone either way. But then when you get the knockdown, you're probably going to give the guy with the knockdown a 10-8. So just tell me your initial impressions of seeing that knockdown. Were you surprised someone as strong as Shawn Porter getting knocked down? I actually agree with Lennox Lewis, which is that Porter's strength is actually what kept him up. You know, I know he went down and he made he actually touched the canvas, but he didn't get knocked down on his back. So I actually think any other fighter in any other welterweight, I think would have been done maybe from that vicious left hand by Errol Spence. What did you think of that knockdown in the 11th round?
Well, I remember when it happened, there's a lot of people that, you know, were like, oh no, like, oh my gosh. But I think, you know, generally thinking, like, when that knockdown happened, I think, you know, a lot of the people watching were like, you know what, that probably sealed the win for Errol. You know,
right.
It was really, really close. And that knockdown with that extra point is probably, if nothing crazy happens in the next round, in the 12th and final round, that knockdown with that point is probably going to seal the win for Shawn Porter. And it was a good little hook that was landed on Porter. You know, I think the only other time that we've seen recently, at least, Porter hit the canvas was in his fight with Broner. And I believe, you know, he hit the canvas earlier on in his career, but the opponent that he faced slips my mind. I want to say it might have been Joel Diaz's brother. had scored a knockdown. But don't quote me at that. I'm not too sure. My memory's kind of fuzzy after all this time. But
right.
yeah, he's shown that he has a durable chin and that he can take it. So I wasn't surprised that happened. I was surprised that he was able to kind of just shrug it off and still continue to be aggressive and come forward. Like Spence wasn't able to put him away. And I don't know, I haven't had a chance to talk to Sean and see if how hurt he was with that knockdown, but it seemed that it didn't affect him too much because round 12, he went right back at him.
He certainly did. And actually, if you look at his reaction, it was almost more of disappointment, right? And it's not, oh my God, I'm hurt. How do I get back? It was, I've worked so hard for this moment. This is such a close fight. And we know that now having a 10-8 round against you is really gonna cause problems in terms of the final scorecards. And obviously we know that's what happened. Spence won the fight, and he certainly deserved to win the fight, but it was a close fight. The other, interesting thing about yourself on the broadcast was the feature about who's next. We've moved on from Floyd Mayweather. We obviously know he's retired. Manny Pacquiao is still in the top of the division, obviously beating Thurman, but we know he's 40 years old, so eventually he will move on. The feature talks about who is next. Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, Errol Spence, of course. So let me ask you this: Who do you think is the next guy in the welterweight division, or even in overall boxing, to kind of carry that torch and be the next star?
Well, that piece that we did was featured on the welterweight division because since Floyd Mayweather has retired, there's been a void as to like who's the name and the face of the division. And with Manny on the twilight of his career, any one of these fights can end up being his last fight, and him and Floyd have carried the division for the better part of the last decade. So really it's focusing on out of those four, which, when you look at it in hindsight, I think we're going to look at those four very fondly through a historical perspective because they chose to fight each other. They were the elite of their division at that time. And for the longest time, we thought it was going to be Keith. And before I get on to this point, this Spence and Porter fight made me realize how good Keith Thurman was back when he was still healthy and still 100%, because I felt that he handled Sean Porter a little bit better, even though he didn't get a knockdown, a little bit better than Errol Spence. Errol Spence had a dogfight with Sean Porter. Keith Thurman outboxed Sean Porter, though it was a close fight, and Sean did have his moments. He never allowed himself to fight Sean Porter in a dogfight. So for a bit, we thought that the one was going to be Keith Thurman because he unified first before everybody. He beat Danny Garcia to get the WBC title, I believe, and then he had gotten the WBA title as well. Now Spence comes along, and we think he's the goods. He passed his first test. He fought his first really elite guy at 147 pounds. I mean elite like the top of the top. But he didn't pass the test with flying colors. There's still a lot of doubts there because of how much problems Porter gave him. And I know everybody was expecting Spence to be in a tough competitive fight, but to be overwhelmingly dominant over Sean Porter, like a convincing win. And there's still a lot of people that feel that Sean Porter won that fight. With that being said, the one is going to be the one that gets all the belts. You have Terrence Crawford out there. His list of opponents haven't been as good now compared to the other guys, but he's still seen as the guy that whoever clears out on the PBC side of the stable has to fight Terrence Crawford. And I think, the winner there is going to be the guy that goes ahead and carries the division. But I think given the attention, the media buzz and hype that Fox has been able to put behind those four guys, and now with Errol Spence being able to unify that, there's certainly a lot more attention, and he could be the guy at 147 pounds up until he fights Terrence Crawford. And if he beats Terrence Crawford, then I could see him being one of the bigger stars in boxing. But certainly, the biggest name in boxing right now since Floyd's retired has been Canelo Alvarez. So I think, in that aspect, like who can be the next face of boxing? Well, we have Canelo, and after Canelo, that's when we're going to see like who's going to be the one that really takes the mantle of carrying the whole name and face of the sport of boxing. But for the welterweight division, it's certainly leaning towards Errol Spence, given this last victory that he had over Sean Porter.
Certainly, it definitely is, especially the way that Spence is trending. And if he can continue to get the big names in the ring and beat these guys, then he will certainly have that. But I'm glad you brought up Terrence Crawford, and I wanted to ask you about that. Obviously, we know that there's different sides of the street. There's different leagues, and it's not only PBC/Fox that's doing this. You know, the Zone put up a graphic on social media saying who should Golovkin fight, and Charlo wasn't mentioned on there. But it is pretty glaring, right, on these Fox broadcasts that Terrence Crawford is not even being mentioned. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that. You know, they're talking about the best names in the welterweight division. They're showing graphics of the title holders. Terrence Crawford is certainly a title holder and one of the top pound for pound fighters in the sport. What do you think about him not being mentioned on the broadcast?
Yeah, you know, it's it puts me in a weird position because, you know, obviously full disclosure, I work for Fox, you know. My best bet is when you look at the UFC never mentions any of the Bellator champions, you know, because they have their own organization with their own champions and all that, you know, and to them, their whole universe, their whole world revolves around who's in their organization, you know, that I think that's, you know, the take that PBC is trying to go with on Fox. They're trying to see themselves as the premier boxing organization. And honestly, they do have just about all the top talent all on one roof and stuff. So I think, you know, because they know that they're trying to kind of, you know, do what the UFC has done in terms of how like they market and push their brand out. You know, you would never see the UFC try to mention any of the Bellator guys and vice versa. When you watch Bellator programming, you don't see them really mention, and, you know, who would our light heavyweight champion would you like to see face? You know, their brand is Bellator, and they like to keep, you know, their fighters and their branding on point with what they're putting on. Now, in terms of him not being mentioned in the discussion, you know, it's difficult because as a boxing fan too, I feel like it could be taken, and I know fans in general have taken it like that, as they're discrediting Terrence, that they're not giving him the respect of being a world champion. And I think it's much more than that. He's not only a world champion at 147 pounds, but he was the undisputed champion at 140. That's not a very common thing to do, you know, and that gives, I think, it adds more credence and respect to somebody like a Terrence Crawford. I know the policy in general, and I think it might come off as, oh, you know, they're trying to throw shade at Terrence Crawford, is that they're no longer recognizing the WBO. They're not recognizing it as a legitimate sanctioning organization. So that is why at times you don't see Crawford in those graphics, because they're only recognizing the WBA, the IBF, and the WBC. So, you know, the unintended consequence with that is it seems on the surface, because I don't think that's been too well publicized, that they're not recognizing. There's people that they know about that have mentioned it. There's people on Twitter that have said it, but I don't think it's been really marketed out. So it comes off as they're trying to ignore Terrence Crawford or trying to forget that he even exists. No, it's not that. It's they just happen not to recognize the WBO title that he holds. It's the same thing with Andy Ruiz. Andy Ruiz is WBO champion, but he's a PBC fighter. But whenever they mention, if you notice the graphics, they don't mention the WBO title. They only mention the other ones that he has. But, you know, you can't, it's like you can't pretend that he doesn't exist, you know, like it's
right. WBO title or not, you know, we know he's a great fighter. Do you think
it's not only that, he's seen as 1A, you know, to Errol Spence's number one at 147 pounds, you know, so you can't pretend like he doesn't exist either.
You can't pretend that. And do you think that if he had one of the other titles, IBF, WBC, WBA, then he would have been shown in the graphic, or do you think, what do you think of that? If he had a different title, do you think they would have mentioned him there?
I think so. I think so, because they showed Canelo on a graphic for a feature we did with David Benavidez. Canelo, they showed Canelo there, you know, and Canelo's a zone guy, but they put him on there. So yeah, I certainly think they would.
Let's hope that they can start to acknowledge the other fighters more. And I say this not just for PBC and Fox. I say for all the other divisions, and I'm sure you feel the same way. I hear you with the comparison of UFC and Bellator, but I think as boxing fans, and I'm sure you feel the same way, no one wants it to be that split out where we're not mentioning or having the matchups that we want. So let's hope that happens. So I wanted to ask you also, we mentioned Keith Thurman, and you know, the fact, I know that you had the interview with Keith Thurman before his fight with Manny Pacquiao. If anyone wants to see it, it's on YouTube. It was in his gym, and you were talking about Pacquiao beating Jeff Horn, and Keith Thurman got very, very agitated. He kind of got in your face a little bit. I'm just curious, you know, your experience on the other end of getting Keith Thurman's wrath there. Were you ever worried at all? Were you ever concerned about Keith Thurman in that moment?
I was surprised, and I remember looking at his eyes, and he had like this crazy look in his eyes, and I was like, oh man, he's really getting angry about this. And I was kind of like, all right, well, you need to, and I remember telling myself in my head, I'm like, all right, like don't over agitate him. Just like, you know, talk to him like in a like don't get all crazy with him. Like as in like don't challenge him too much and stuff like that. Don't give him even more aggregated. Cause yeah, like he completely like started getting all crazy. And I don't know if he was just doing it for the cameras or he was, I struck a nerve with him or I don't know what, but yeah, I saw that crazy look in his eyes and I was just like, oh wow, he's getting really mad. But hey, I will still say to this day, Jeff Horn didn't win that fight. I don't know what he was seeing, to be honest. You know, and I think a majority of boxing fans feel that Jeff Horn didn't win that fight.
Oh, certainly. I think everyone saw Pacquiao. I think it was the 9th round where he almost knocked him out, and I think they saw what he did the rest of the fight. And I'm sure a lot of people thought Pacquiao should have won that fight. Who went off more, in your opinion, and in which interview did you feel more uncomfortable? The one with Keith Thurman or the one with Angel Garcia? Danny Garcia's dad, I know. He got in your face as well.
Definitely Angel Garcia, because with the Angel Garcia one, I legit thought he was going to punch me in the face. Like I was expecting he was either going to punch me in the face or he was going to go grab my throat. So I started actually, if there was a wider view of that interview, I put my leg back just in case to go ahead and embrace if he did like lunge at me or did throw a punch so I wouldn't like completely fall over. And I could see like the people in his team, he got the attention of them because they were like looking at him too. And I remember after that they took him away, but yeah, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was like, okay, well, if he's going to hit you, you better put a leg back because you don't want to fall over or hit anything, you know, and I'm like, just expect it because he's getting like really, really crazy. And I remember that whole week they were Danny was the only one that was calm, but everybody else in that team was really, really like in a weird mood. They were really agitated. I don't know if they were nervous or, you know, or scared, you know, at that time. We all know Matisse was just mowing down through people. And honestly, none of us gave Danny a chance. I'll admit it. I thought Matisse was going to win that fight. I thought Matisse was probably going to knock him out. So, you know, maybe that was coming into play, like the hype of this Lucas Matisse, who at that point was just mowing down through people. But no, definitely that Angel Garcia one. But the funny thing is I asked Angel 2 years after that interview, like, hey, you know, were you gonna hit me? Like, were you close to hitting me? Right. And he started laughing. He's like, no, man, I would never, ever in a million years do that to anybody. I'm like, no way. And he just laughed. He's like, but it was good for you, right? And I'm like, yeah, you know, people still ask me about that interview whenever they see me. He's like, oh, there you go, you know. So we always have a little laugh about it. And because of it, like, I feel like we have a really, really good relationship now with each other when we see each other.
Well, that's good that you guys have a good relationship. It's funny that you kind of struck a nerve with him simply by asking about the opponent that they were fighting. That's a very common and normal thing for anyone interviewing to ask. So it was kind of funny that it went down that way. I'm glad that you didn't have to deal with him punching in your face, just with him being aggressive. So just to close it out, let's do a little bit of a speed round here. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about fights coming up, and you tell me your pick or how you think they're going to play out. First question, Canelo versus GGG. Do you think that we're going to get that fight maybe in May of next year? Do you think that the trilogy is going to come together there?
Yeah, I think so, because that's the whole reason why they signed Canelo and Triple G. And if I'm somebody that's paying Canelo $360 million, I'm going to make sure I get my value from that. And I'm going to make sure that he knows I'm the one that's paying you you better go ahead and fight this guy. So yeah, I would expect for it to happen.
Let's definitely hope it does. I think that's the fight that everyone wants to see. I think Golovkin being vulnerable in the way he was in his last fight, I think that makes it even more interesting.
Yeah, that was another super close fight too to score. That was a tough fight also.
Yeah, that's another tough one. I saw you had that 6-6 with the knockdown going for Golovkin, so him getting the win there. But that was another back-to-back close fight. Canelo versus Kovalev. Obviously, for that Triple G fight to happen, he probably needs to get by Kovalev on November 2nd. So what is your pick on Canelo Kovalev?
Yeah, that's a hard one, man. You would think Canelo, because of his speed and Kovalev's inability to take punishment really well to the body, and that being Canelo's thing. But like when you look at his fight style-wise, like on paper, Kovalev should win this fight, to be honest. Like he's a very good boxer. He's longer, bigger, has more power, has a great jab, very underrated boxing. With Buddy McGirt, he's shown to be boxing more, light on his feet. You know, he fought a guy in Yard that a lot of people say, like, well, if Yard was able to do that, Canelo's just going to walk over him. But like people are forgetting, Canelo's moving up 2 weight classes. He's not as big as Yard. You know, Canelo, and this was brought up to me by Andre Rozier, which really made me think Canelo's never really hurt a guy at middleweight, to be honest. He's a small middleweight. He's like, well, what makes you think he's going to hurt a Kovalev, a guy that is naturally a lot bigger than him? Don't be surprised if Sergey Kovalev wins and wins by outpointing Canelo with his jab. But on the flip side, me personally, I always like the smaller guys that are quicker when they're up against the bigger guys, because I feel, speed kills. And we could see something like that. But I think the fight's going to be very, very competitive. And there could be some scary moments in there for Canelo. But I'm going with them, but with very, very severe hesitation, because my gut is telling me style-wise, Canelo should not win this fight.
Certainly. I think, Canelo is good at combination punching, especially to the body, and Kovalev's vulnerable to the body. So I think that's going to play into Canelo's favor. But I do agree with you that I actually think the weight jump, 15 pounds, right? That's a lot. I think that's going to play a factor. And there might be moments where Canelo says, whoa, hold on. I'm in this with a bigger guy. The next fight I wanted to ask you about, and I'm guessing you're going to be there being the unofficial scorer, Deontay Wilder versus Luis Ortiz. And before I ask you about that, the one thing I want to say is I actually think there's a lot of pressure on Deontay Wilder in this, and I'll tell you why. Wilder says that when he fights fighters and beats them, they're never the same. So for him to back that up, he has to really knock out Ortiz even sooner than he did the first time, right? Because in his theory, when he knocks a guy out, they're never the same. So what is your pick on Wilder versus Luis Ortiz 2?
I think Wilder, honestly, it's dependent on what Ortiz shows up. If Ortiz shows up better conditioned than that first fight and doesn't show his age and is able to hurt Wilder again and not tire out and able to pace himself, he should win the fight, but it's the biggest factor is Luis Ortiz. That's what it is, unless we get like a Wilder washing him out and around. Usually he tends to do real well in rematches, as we saw with Bermane Stiverne. But I think, the safe bet, of course, is Wilder, because he has everything in his corner in terms of like youth, power, speed. Obviously, his technique is nowhere near Luis Ortiz's, but his conditioning is a lot better as well. So, the safe bet would be on Wilder, but really the wild factor is what Ortiz shows up. If it's an Ortiz that is the best he can be, and the best he's ever been in his career, and he doesn't tire out the way he tired out in that first fight, where he had Wilder pretty much out on his feet in that round, he could very much win this fight. And we've been seeing upsets after upsets this year in big marquee matchups as well.
Absolutely. And the question will be Luis Ortiz. He's listed at 40 years old. Who knows if he's older? The speculation that he's a little bit older. So let's see how much he has left. 2 more fights real quick before I let you go. If Wilder can get past Ortiz, he hopefully can get the Tyson Fury rematch, which is something we all want to see. Hopefully that would be early next year. If you had to ballpark that fight, how do you see that one playing out?
I really got to see how Deontay Wilder does in this Ortiz rematch for me to properly be able to forecast like how it could go. they always say in rematches, the boxer does better. Luis Ortiz is the boxer. So with that saying, he should do better in this rematch. As well with the Fury fight, Fury's the better boxer than Wilder. He should do better. Usually in rematches, historically, the boxer is always able to shut down and take away the thing that gave them problems in that first fight. That's Deontay Wilder's power. So how do you take his power away? Well, one, you smother him, you fight him close so he can't get full extension in his punches. Or two, you knock him off balance with the jab so he can't get set in the place to throw his big power hand. What does Tyson Fury do best? He moves and he jabs, but he looked really bad in this last fight against Otto Wallin. So it's hard to see. I think maybe, Fury didn't get up for this fight like he would have a bigger name opponent. I've been thinking for the longest time, maybe Wilder's a little bit overtrained because he's been in camps like nonstop since he came back against a Turkish fighter that he fought close to a year and a half ago. So I don't know. I got to see how Wilder looks in this fight with Ortiz to be able to kind of compare and contrast who does what in the rematch.
It'll certainly be interesting, and let's hope it happens. I think Otto Wallin was actually a much tougher opponent than a lot of us thought. And I think he had a really good chin, and he went for the knock-in. I think he deserves credit for that. So last fight I wanted to ask you about, it's another rematch. Anthony Joshua versus Andy Ruiz 2. It's a massive, massive fight. I personally think Joshua is going to make the adjustments. I think he's going to be a little bit more technical, and I think he will open up less, even if he has Ruiz hurt, leaving himself open less because he knows the hand speed is there for Ruiz. So I think Joshua's going to make the adjustments. What do you think about that rematch? I'm
going to go with Andy Ruiz. He's quicker, faster hands. And, obviously what Joshua did in the first fight was pretty much what he was supposed to do. Other than, his head not being in the right spot, both coming into the ring and being inside the ring. But it's just to me, it's a bad style matchup for Joshua, who's a little bit like stiff in there, robotic. He's a little slower. He throws ones and twos while Andy throws 3, 4, and 5s. And the other thing is, I think, Joshua's head is not in the right place, I don't think, still. Seeing him in New York, speaking with him, I think there's still a lot of questions there, a lot of doubts there, a lot of soul searching still. And usually, when you suffer your first loss, it either goes and it lifts you up and takes you to even greater heights, or it just completely trashes you as a fighter, and you can never get past it, especially when you suffer your first knockout. Look what happened to Ronda Rousey. She could never, come back from that Holly Holm knockout. A lot of other fighters, when they get knocked out, they have a difficult time coming back and being successful. And with that said, if Andy is training, he has a longer camp now to prepare for Joshua. I like his chances in this fight because of the hand speed. So I'll go with Andy Ruiz beating Joshua again.
Speed kills in boxing, and that's certainly a possibility. I saw Joshua at the New York press conference as well. He has a little bit more humility. He's a little more introspective. So we'll see how that translates into training. We'll see how that translates into the rematch. Marcos Villegas, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate all your insight, breaking it down for us. And I'm sure we'll see you on Fight Hub. We'll see you ringside, unofficially scoring these fights for PBC. Thanks so much, and hope to talk to you soon.
Oh, thank you, my man. Anytime, man. It's always fun chatting the fights with you.
That was Marcos Villegas breaking it down. Now, on that same card where he was the unofficial scorer for Spence Porter, the undercard was also a really good fight. It was Anthony Durrell versus David Benavidez. Durrell was the champion. Benavidez trying to get his belt back, and he was able to do so. And the reason he was able to do so is because he landed a punch that opened up a cut, and that was too much for Durrell to handle. And there was a man named Javon Sugarhill, who I'll be speaking to. He was the trainer of Durrell, and he had to make the tough decision to call the fight, to say, hey, enough's enough. And that's going to be a tough decision when your fighter is giving everything they have in the ring. They've worked so hard for this moment. If you remember the backstory of Anthony Durrell, I mean, he's gone through a lot of adversity. He came back from cancer. He came back from a motorcycle accident that nearly killed him. So he's been through so much to get back to this level. And then you have to make a decision there to say, hey, I need to stop this fight. And that's what happened. And that's why I wanted to speak to Sugar Hill about the psychology of going into that decision. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Sugar Hill.
This is Curran Bhatia for the Ask the Experts podcast, speaking to Javon Sugar Hill. So Sugar Hill, you were the coach for Anthony Durrell. He had the tough task of David Benavidez on September 28th at Staples Center. So I just want to know your initial impressions. You know, Anthony in the ring with David. Obviously, David stands very upright. He's a tall fighter. He has that size. What did you notice early on in terms of Durrell's success against Benavidez?
The success Anthony was having was just boxing Benavidez, making him do what he wanted, making David do what he wanted him to do. They were both jabbing. David was missing a lot. He just wasn't as effective as he normally would be, and just wasn't as comfortable as he normally is when boxing. And Anthony gave those things to David, which had Anthony in total control.
Anthony was doing his thing. He was landing combinations. He was moving a lot. And even though Benavidez seemed like the slightly bigger guy, Anthony was able to kind of punch up a little bit. Did you train for all of that? And was everything that David Benavidez brought out, especially early on, was that what you expected?
Pretty much is what I expected. David is a great fighter, and he's young and he's learning. He's learned a lot. He has a lot to learn. And what David came into the ring as is what I thought he would do. Everything that he did is what I thought he would do and what I knew he would do.
And he's a notoriously slow starter, and then he kind of picks it up and starts to throw more combination punches. He's known as a combination puncher. So early on, were you preparing Anthony a little bit to say, hey, this guy may start a little slow and he's going to turn it on in the later rounds?
No, I wasn't preparing him for David to turn it on in the later rounds. I know David is a 12-round fighter, and I just prepare Anthony for 12 rounds. David is, I guess, what you said, he starts slow. I don't think of David as starting slow, but I know as the fight goes on, David is an intelligent fighter, and he's able to make adjustments, pretty much the same as Anthony. That's why I loved this fight so much, the matchup of the styles and the athletes. And I thought it was a great fight, for Anthony and for David. And, those two guys, they're competitors. Anthony, he didn't want to quit. It was my decision to stop the fight. And, just because, it's a cut. Anthony wasn't getting beat up or anything like that, but it was just a cut. It was a very bad cut. And I didn't want the cut to get any worse and, possibly, put a halt to his career or, endanger any part of his life where he couldn't enjoy the time with his kids and his family.
Absolutely. And we know Anthony is such a great fighter. He came into this fight with a 6-fight winning streak. We know what he's come back from in terms of cancer and a motorcycle accident. So it obviously took a lot of work to get to this level. And it was definitely an explosive matchup. When did you first notice the cut over Anthony's eye?
If I'm correct, I noticed the cut in the 6th round. I didn't see the punch. It was just when his back was turned toward me, and when he turned around, I looked. I saw it was a certain movement he made, something where I thought I saw something. So I was really focused, and I'm like, "What is that?" And he finally, was facing me, and I saw the cut. Later on, I still haven't seen the fight yet, but later on, I was told it was from a jab. So. Just a jab, not no big blow or anything like that, but just a little jab. And that's boxing, it happens in fight. And this was one of the reasons why, for me and Anthony and the rest of the team, I would definitely love a rematch with David Benavidez, because it was a competitive fight. And from what I'm hearing, like I said, I haven't seen it yet, but everyone's telling me that Anthony was up on the scorecards, and it was just a cut. Anthony couldn't see. And, that brought the halt to the fight.
That brought the halt. And when you first saw the cut, Was your initial reaction, let's kind of see how this plays out, let's keep an eye on it for the next few rounds? Did you think about stopping the fight earlier? I mean, what was your mindset when you first saw the cut there?
When I first saw the cut, I'm just thinking, Carlos Vargas cut, man, it's time for you to go to work. And, he did the best he could do, in that round, and they came back for the seventh round. Seventh round, Anthony told me, he said, I can't see. And I looked at his eye and I was like, the referee had stopped it twice already to let the doctor see it. And I was like, thinking to myself, well, I was thinking that they were going to stop it because of the cut already. When the doctor checked it twice. And I just told Anthony, I said, fuck it. I said, go out there and make this the last round. That was round 8. And Anthony went out there in round 8 and had a good round in round 8. He controlled the round 8. And when he came back to the corner, I was just looking at him. I said, well, what you want to do? Because that was a good round. I thought maybe the cut would have bothered him a bit more, but it was, Carlos did a good job with the cut. And we went out for the 9th round. And I just was watching him, and at that point I saw that the cut started bleeding again where he couldn't see out of both eyes. And that was my choice to stop the fight. He couldn't see. He couldn't defend himself. He couldn't attack, plot any offense or anything. So I just stopped the fight.
Yeah, I actually tweeted that during the broadcast because we could hear you between rounds, and you said, fuck it, go for it. So obviously what you meant by that is, this cut's bothering you, the doctor's getting close to stopping it, go for the home run there, go for the knockout, right? That's what your instructions were at that point?
That's the Crunk way. That's what Emmanuel would have said. So I've been through so much living with him and learning, and it was just natural. I know what to do. It's not that I had to think about it, but thinking about it now, I know that's what Emmanuel would have said. I mean, you got nothing else to lose. They're gonna stop the fight on the cut anyway. Might as well give it all you got.
I spent a long time working side by side with the great Emmanuel Stewart, and of course you did as well. And if that's what he would have done, then that's definitely the right advice, for sure. So in that last round, the 9th round, just walk me through the making. How did you make that decision at that time? What was going through your head, and how did you finally pull the trigger and say, okay, that's it, enough's enough here?
Well, at that time, I could see the blood was in both his eyes. It wasn't because of where the cut was at. It was close to the bridge of the nose, and it was traveling over to his left eye. I saw that when we wiped it out. Wiped it off the first time, and then and at the end of the 8th round, it was still over there in the eye, but it wasn't bleeding as fast. And in the 9th round, matter of fact, the 8th round he turned softball. So I said go back softball, but he couldn't go back softball because the eye was it was cut so bad he couldn't see out of his lead eye, his right eye, which would have been a softball stand. So he stayed right-handed. At that point, I was like, oh boy, because he couldn't go back to the softball stand, to fight because he couldn't see. And I think it was one of the neutral corners, and David started picking up the pace. And I'm like, Anthony really can't hold him off because he can't see. He couldn't kind of think. Anthony even threw a punch and just clearly missed, like didn't even know where he was at. So at that point, I was just thinking like, I look like I'm going to have to stop it unless he can, hold Benavidez, tie him up or something like that. But he couldn't even see enough to do that pretty much. So informed the commissioner in the corner to step up on the apron and stop the fight, and that's what was done.
And it definitely was the right decision there, Anthony, not being able to perform at the best of his ability because not being able to see. What did Anthony say to you after the fight? Did he support you stopping the fight? Did he want to keep going? What did he say to you?
Anthony didn't say that. He didn't mind stopping the fight. He said, you made the call. He trusts me. Me and Anthony are like family, so I got to take care of him like a little brother. As if I wanted someone to take care of me. It was the right decision. He wasn't mad about it. He said, man, he said, I want a rematch. He said, I want to fight him again. He said, I was winning. It's just the cut. I just couldn't, just the cut. The fight was competitive enough. And I feel that there should be a rematch for that fight. Things would be a lot different.
Let's hope that rematch does materialize. I think Anthony certainly deserved deserves a rematch against David Benavidez, and it was a great fight. So what is the timetable for Anthony now? Obviously, going to have to take some time to let the cut heal up. When do you think that we could see him back in the ring?
I'm not sure. I think a cut like that maybe takes a good 3 months, 3-4 months to heal up properly. And that's just enough time for those guys to get back in shape and fight again pretty much. Soon after that they can set a deal for the fight. And those two guys should be fighting again. I don't think that that's why I'm speaking so highly of the rematch. I'm voicing my opinion. It should be an immediate rematch. I think David gave one of his other opponents a rematch. After their fight. So why wouldn't he give Anthony a rematch? David did say it was the toughest fight of his life. So he likes the competition. Then I feel that he should get a rematch, and they can settle this. They can settle this, once again.
Absolutely. 2 fights ago, he gave Ronald Gabriel a rematch. So it was announced after the fight that Benavidez was actually possibly going to fight Avni Yildirim, who's an opponent that obviously very well, because that was Anthony's last opponent. Before this, there was also a cut in that fight, but that time it was because of a head clash. So it also came out in the news recently that Yildirim had tested positive for two performance enhancing drugs. They're looking into it. There's going to be a WBC investigation. I spoke to Yildirim's team. They said that it's that Avni never took anything, and the investigation will kind of prove that. What do you make of that? The opponent that you just fought now tests positive. I mean, that can't be a good feeling for you, knowing that Anthony was out there against someone who possibly did performance enhancing drugs, right?
I don't look at it that way. That fight is in the past. Avni tested positive, which Benavidez was supposed to fight. Let's put Anthony back in there and fight him again. Same as when David had tested positive. He had to sit, and wait. And I just think it's more fitting, and things happen for certain reasons. Anthony should be getting that fight again. If not, Avni wouldn't have tested. Not being funny, but Avni wouldn't have tested positive. That wasn't the way it's supposed to be. Anthony should be getting that fight, that rematch again, and let Avni settle out his differences and in his situation, and let those two guys go ahead and fight.
Absolutely, and just to close it off, you and Anthony, like we said, have been through the adversity and made the comebacks and had the great moments. We talked about the car accident, cancer, and all the stuff that you guys have been together for so long. So I'm guessing the mindset with you and Anthony is going to be the same right now, which is, you've overcome adversity before and overcoming it this time and getting back in the ring and hopefully getting the rematch. You're still going to have that positive outlook and still looking to make that happen, right?
Hey, that's why I'm talking to you. Rematch. Anthony deserves a rematch with David Benavidez. Those two guys should fight again. Those guys are both champions. David has just become the 2-time champion. Anthony was 2-time champion. Anthony Dirrell becomes a 3-time world champion in the middleweight division.
Absolutely. Let's hope that rematch comes together next. I would certainly like to see it. I'm sure the fans would like to see it. Javon Sugar Hill, thank you so much for your time. Best of luck with Anthony. Yeah,
so
go ahead.
Everybody says my name wrong, but it's easier to just say Sugar Hill Stewart or Sugar Hill or something like that, because my first name gets butchered so much I don't use it so much.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. So let me rephrase that. Sugar Hill Stewart, thank you so much for the time. Best of luck to you, and I hope to see you in the ring soon. Hopefully we'll see the rematch Dirrell Benavidez, and I'm sure you're also keeping busy with the big stable of fighters that you have. Thank you so much for the time, and I hope to see you back in there soon.
Okay, Anthony Dirrell, David Benavidez rematch, part 2.
Part 2, let's make it happen.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, take care. Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.
That was Anthony Dirrell's trainer and many other fighters' trainers. Sugar Hill, a great trainer, a very candid and honest person, giving us his take of what happened on September 28th. So before Anthony Dirrell fought David Benavidez, he actually took on Avni Yildirim from Turkey, and that was actually a close fight as well, and it was actually involving a cut. Eventually it was stopped and went to the scorecards because that cut was from an accidental headbutt. Anthony Dirrell won that fight. Avni Yildirim did not, but he was very upset because he felt like he was very competitive. So now Avni Yildirim felt like he should get the winner of Benavidez and Dirrell, and he was, as you'll hear in my interview, signing to fight David Benavidez. That fight was coming together. Now, something that actually took place after my interview, which I didn't get a chance to ask Avni and his manager, Ahmet Owner, about, was Avni Yildirim tested positive for 2 performance-enhancing drugs. Now, the investigation is still going by the WBC, so they're going to look into this further. They're going to make an announcement in the near future, they said, so we're not sure exactly what's happening, if that's going to affect Avni getting that shot at David Benavidez. I was texting with Avni's promoter, and I asked him, hey, this happened after our interview, so what's going on? Is that fight still on? He said, and I quote, "No, all good. He never did drugs or anything like that. The fight is in place. So far, we are waiting for a final decision by officials, but so far, all good." So, end quote. So, Avni Yildirim's team is confident that nothing actually happened. They're denying the positive result there, and they are saying that Avni will go forward with fighting David Benavidez next. So, here is my interview with Avni Yildirim and his promoter, who will serve as the translator. That is Ahmet Owner. We're going to talk about that David Benavidez fight, and we're going to talk about what other fights on the horizon Avni Yildirim would like to get. This is Curran Bhatia speaking to Avni Yildirim and Ahmet Owner. You remember that Avni fought Anthony Dirrell in the last fight, and that was actually stopped due to a cut. Dirrell won that fight. And Avni, I know you were ringside to see David Benavidez versus Anthony Dirrell. So what did you make of the fight sitting ringside there?
I already, in my opinion, gave Dirrell a very hard fight. I brought him to that position that when he fought Benavidez, he showed the same performance with his open eyes, this time another eye. He was already hurt and punished for me, and Benavidez was only there to finish it. What I was stopped to finish. They don't let me finish it. They stopped it. And I saw in Dirrell a fighter who only came to make the money. I not saw a guy who was there to beat Benavidez.
So you felt Dirrell was there for the payday, not to win. So Ahmet, let me ask you this, because now that David Benavidez did win the fight, Avni Yildirim's name has been thrown out as his opponent, but also Benavidez has said that he may want to fight Caleb Plant. He's mentioned a couple other names. So how are you going to get Avni that fight, Ahmet?
The fight is already signed.
The fight's already signed. So when is that fight going to be?
It is PBC doing the fight night. We wait a couple of weeks for announcement, and it was a part of the deal when we went to the WBC to Mexico, and we had a claim against the decision that Dirrell won against Avni in a fight. It was stopped, and we saw we got. We did not get what Avni made in the fight. In my opinion, he should win the fight. He got stopped through the referee, and he got saved to officials. Now the WBC made the ruling, and after the ruling, they said, okay, there is to be an immediate rematch. And then PBC asked us, can we do Benavidez between Dirrell, and can we do then the winner? Yes, we made the paperwork, everything is signed, and we agreed, and therefore we came. We watched the fight, we were invited by PBC, we saw the fight, we got our tickets, everything was fine, and now we are only waiting for the date.
So the fight, David Benavidez versus Avni Yildirim, is signed. You're just looking for a date. So that's excellent. So my question now for Avni is, you said that Benavidez versus Dirrell was very similar to your fight. You said Benavidez is a true champion, but you don't see him as a skilled boxer. So why did you not see Benavidez as a skilled boxer?
He is a true fighter, a true champion. but he's missing the amateur background, in my opinion. I'm speaking in the name of Avni. He is missing the experience what amateur fighters, all the most amateur fighters made, and I believe that is what he's missing against me.
And Avni, do you feel that he's a very tall fighter? He's about almost 6'2", and he fights in a tall way. Do you think the height difference is going to be a problem at all when you match up?
He's not using his reach, in my opinion. He's coming forward. Therefore, I don't believe that will be not his really advantage. He's saying he's coming to fight. He's a brawler. Even if he's a tall guy, he's coming to make a fight, and that is benefiting me. He's
same combination, same punch, everything is same.
One-dimensional fighter with good punches. He's very fast. He's very quick. He can do good combinations. But always the same. So I think, my opinion, my advice to Avni, not to give Benavides too much.
He's the best.
He is the best. Benavides is the best to fight. He is the best.
Now he's the best. Okay, so yeah, that makes sense. You don't want to give away too much of the game plan, and that makes sense. Let me ask you this, Avni. You and Anthony Dirrell, before your fight, there was some bad blood there. You guys were going back and forth. You didn't seem to like each other, and especially after the fight, you didn't seem to like each other. What is your relationship like with David Benavides? Do you like David Benavides? Are you friendly with him? What's the personal relationship like?
So let me explain you. Benavides, they met each other. They met in LA. He has a Turkish conditional coach. There's a nice guy. Benavides, we met each other. He was respectful to me, and I showed him my respect. So respect is big written here in boxing. Respect has to be there. I see by Benavides against my performance some respect, what I did against Dirrell, and I show him the same, but we will fight each other. So we have no bad blood. There is no bad blood.
So in the first fight between Avni and Dirrell, Avni said that the PBC saved Dirrell. So it was obviously a close fight. It was going back and forth. The cut opened, and they announced Dirrell the winner. So I'm just curious, Avni or Ahmed, whoever wants to take this one, but how do you feel the PBC saved him? Do you think the scorecards were too much in favor of Dirrell in that fight?
I don't think, people talk much. I don't see that PBC saved him. In my opinion, this said Benavides, not we. He said this one day before his fight. I have this reportage. He said, we never said this word. What we said is, Benavides said on some boxing scene or whatever we read this, that PBC saved Dirrell. We never used the word PBC in this. I said especially that the referee from Minneapolis, from the local judge and the doctor, stopped the fight too fast. And that looked like a saving. So I don't see...
Hatta dedi ki orada ben dedi Yildirim maçına örnek aldım. O yüzden maçı erken bitirmek
So and he said...
Kaşı açıldığında zaten onu yaptı. Direkt saldırdı.
And what we saw in the fight with Benavides and Dirrell, he did not let anything go to the judges or doctors. He finished it. Because maybe he got afraid that same shit can happen to him. But what we say is, PBC never saved him. I don't think that PBC cares for this so much. So because this is not, I don't believe that. I think local American judge in Minneapolis favored his guy. It's normal, can happen. So because the referee was not from the WBC. And the doctor, I never saw him in WBC fight. So we never used the word PBC for this, never. So.
And Avni, do you want Anthony Dirrell sometime in the future? Do you want another rematch, or are you moved on from Anthony Dirrell?
I really don't care anymore for Dirrell. He's finished. His performance in his last fight, I think there is nothing to turn back. We should look forward. Benavides, Caleb Plant, Carlos Smith, Chris Eubank.
For me, important.
For Avni, it's important, Chris Eubank. He thinks on Chris Eubank because
not
Dirrell
he's the finished.
He's finished. Duel is finished, like Avni said. He's finished.
You feel Durrell is finished? Like you think he's going to retire? He's done with boxing?
I think so. My opinion. If he don't get a big payday, why should he fight?
Right. And so, the fight that Avni you really want is Chris Eubank, the rematch, the one that you lost in 2017.
If I win the belt, after I win the belt, I will defend my title against Chris Eubank.
And so just give me your prediction on fighting David Benavidez. It's obviously going to be a very difficult fight, but do you feel that you can knock out David Benavidez? Do you think it's more of a 12-round decision? What's your prediction against Benavidez?
I will win with knockout.
Predicting the knockout against David Benavidez, that's going to be very difficult. So final message for Avni and Ahmet, both of you guys. What would be the final message to your fans, to Turkey, to all the supporters who are looking forward to seeing you in the ring again?
I want to be the first Turkish world champion, I'm trying to make myself in boxing a legend, to do things what never before me anybody made. Because we know he's an underdog. He comes as an underdog, but in my opinion, he's a true warrior, and Benavidez too, and one of guys has to be knocked out. I don't see a decision. If it's a decision, my friend, both of them will have headaches after the fight.
And do you enjoy that, being the underdog? Do you like that role of playing spoiler and being the underdog?
I am used to be not favor. When I fought Durrell, I was 5-1 underdog, and so nothing changed for me.
Herkes her şeyi biliyor.
Everybody knows everything.
Benim için önemsiz.
I don't care.
Her şey ringde belli oluyor.
Everything will be shown in the ring.
İsterse bana hiç şans vermesinler.
They can't even give me no chance. I don't care.
Benavidez knows me.
Benavidez knows me, and that's his message.
And last question, give me your final message for David Benavidez. What do you want to say to David Benavidez?
Now it's time to meet a real opponent.
All right. Avni Yildirim, Ahmet Owner, thank you so much for the time. Best of luck to you. We're looking forward to seeing you fight David Benavidez soon.
Thank you.
There you have Avni Yildirim and his manager, promoter, who served as a translator and also gave his own thoughts, Ahmet Owner. Now, the one thing, like I said before the interview, is that the positive test came to light actually after we did our interview. So I was not able to ask Avni specifically about it. But like I said, I texted with Ahmet after, and he said that they are denying it and that all things are still on track for David Benavidez to fight Avni Yildirim next. Let's see what happens with that. So my last guest here is trying to shake up the world of boxing. His name's Jay Chaudhry. He's working on a documentary called Dear Boxing. He wants to bring boxing to the modern ages, right? To get it out of the dark ages, to help with promotion and things like that. And the reason I wanted to have Jay on was I want to make sure that what he's doing is to grow the sport, and that is what he's doing, right? He's trying to figure out ways to enhance the popularity of boxing, get it into the mainstream audience more. And that's what I wanted to talk to Jay about, how exactly he's going to go about doing that. So here's my conversation with Jay Chaudhry. This is Curran Bhatia of the Ask the Experts podcast, speaking to Jay Chaudhry. He's the co-founder of Break Media. He's an award-winning filmmaker who's been involved with sports for a long time. He's the recent winner of the Synopsis Media Award for Partnerships in Sports in 2019. So Jay, obviously you've been in sports for a long time, and your work in sports brought you to boxing. And boxing is not like other sports for many reasons. One of those reasons is in certain aspects, unfortunately, boxing is in the dark ages, right? And there's some lesser, there's some gray areas is the most PC way to say it. So what was your experience in terms of working in the sports world and then working in the boxing world, and then some of the things that you saw there?
Yeah, I think boxing specifically is a bullet hold sport where there's a lot of gray areas in it. Just working with professional athletes for the majority of my recent career has led me to boxing, and it led me to understand how this sport is so independently run. And because of because of the small ways that the boxing world is ran. And when I say small, it means in terms of how the other leagues are doing it, like NBA, NHL, and NFL. There's no system in our sport, and because of the fact that there's no system, there's a lot of bullet holes. I just feel like there's just a bunch of sanctioning bodies competing with one another. There's a bunch of promoters, egotistical promoters, competing with one another, and these exact same promoters are now building egotistical fighters who are competing against one another, and it just kind of lost its sweet science, in the marketing aspect of it, for sure.
And that it's an issue because we have these leagues, right, in boxing.
Yeah.
A fragmented sport is not good for anyone. And we have these leagues where if you see on PBC broadcast, they for a welterweight fight, there's no mention of Terrence Crawford, right? Because obviously he's with Top Rank and ESPN, and that's a major problem. Or if you see on the Zone, they're showing Canelo's possible opponents, and Charlo's not mentioned, and that's not what we want as fans, right? We want the best
sportsmanship
matchups.
right there. I mean, it's not like the FIFA, dude. I mean, we're not NBA, we're not NHL, we're not voting for teams. Fans are not voting for team PBC or team Top Rank or team DAZN or team Golden Boy. We're team, fighters, and we're team boxers. Like, everybody supports different NBA teams and stuff like that, but nobody is against the individual themselves. We cheer for our home teams, we cheer for our home players, but the animosity that these promoters are building amongst fans is not healthy for the sport at all, because it's leaving us divided. And this is one of the main reasons why fights are not being made, because it's, as you said, it's Team Porter versus Team Spence versus Team Crawford. And unless the fans are able to kind of unite and get together and root for the culture of boxing instead of just individual, I don't see the sport growing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've said that for a long time. I said one of the things that we can do as fans is anytime we see these promoters or these fighters or anyone involved in the sport, we as fans need to demand the matchups, right? So public demand finally brought together Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. It was many years too late, but we need to say we want Errol Spence versus Terrence Crawford, and we're not going to watch Errol Spence versus subpar competition or Terrence Crawford versus subpar competition. We want to see these guys together, because the fear, which can happen, is these fights can over marinate, and then they may not happen, or one guy loses, and then we as fans lose out on that.
You just brought up such an amazing point there, Curran. You said, we as fans lose interest, and that's what sucks, because people like you and I, the hardcore fans, boxing Twitter, for example. It's funny, because I read all these tweets. I see a lot of one-sidedness, and I see a lot of fans talking about the business of boxing. And I just tweeted this out this morning. I said, as I'm more and more researching this industry and the sports fans, it's like I see that they're more worried about, not worried, they're more interested in learning about the business of boxing, how much views a pay-per-view did versus the next guy. And it's like, why are you guys so fucking curious about how much views a pay-per-view did? And then I started to understand why. It's because fans are frustrated, man. And our hardcore fans are the ones that make boxing actually move, because boxing has not hit the masses yet. And this is part of why I created Break Media Group, because we bring boxing to the masses one fighter at a time by digitizing them, by producing content and web series and, fresh new ways of engaging with fans. But besides that, boxing itself is such a niche sport, Garn, and there's only a few thousand people running the engine. I'm telling you, there's not hundreds of thousands, there's not millions, and there's a few thousand incredibly unique hardcore fans who are running the sport, but they're not enough to create the movements that we want, which is getting the fights that we need.
That's exactly it. We need to get these matchups, and I would even argue that there are probably thousands, but there's probably even less in terms of the key opinion leaders, the leaders who can actually move these mountains and
100%
work with other networks. It's an even smaller pool than that. But let me ask you one other thing before we talk about the documentary that you're working on, is the promotion in the sport. And I've heard you talk about this, and I think it's important. We're a little bit in the dark ages in terms of boxing promotion. These press conferences that can kind of go on for a bit with people, people from the promotion talking, and then the owner of the arena talks, and it kind of drags it down in energy when everyone just wants to hear from these fighters, right? So what about marketing and promotion? How do we get out of the dark ages in that?
Man, I just think that, like, straight up, networks, promoters, and managers are doing shit all when it comes to promoting our fighters outside of the sport. Other than fight night and fight week, there is absolutely zero marketing and promotion done on behalf of our fighters. There's absolutely zero interest in promoting these amazing top athletes in the world of worldwide sports and mass fan base connection. And this is part of the reason why Break Media Group was even created fundamentally, because I wanted to bring boxing back to the masses. I wanted to bring boxing back to the forefront of American sports. There is such lack of storytelling, Karan, in our sport that it's freaking embarrassing to even tell people that you're a boxing fan because they don't understand why you have so much passion for it. We just lack that storytelling. And I think, I'm going back to even HBO days. I mean, they were pretty much the only front runners in the sport. And the work that you've done, for example, with this HBO 24/7 series that you were on, like, you and I talk plenty about how emotional storytelling connects with a fan and resonates with them. And now it's like, where is it? There's zero. And then when an opportunity comes, for example, Logan Paul versus KSI, where we're dealing with millions and millions of fans, what's the response? Oh, fuck this. This is not boxing. This is comedy. It's like, no, dude, this is a millions of eyeballs. It's up to boxing now to present itself in a way. We've entered the party. We got to dress for the occasion and make sure that we leave with a couple of people who are attached to our hip. And that's what's lacking in our sport, dude.
I think, it's interesting with the KSI and Logan Paul. I think, and I've said this before, I think that is a good event, a great event. And I think those YouTubers have actually earned the right to have that event because they're bringing their teams of followers, which they've done work to maintain and to build. Like, you don't just get millions of followers, right? You have to put out content. You have to engage with fans. You have to resonate with fans. And so that takes work, number one. Number two is that they're not taking the opportunities away from anyone else, right? They're fighting each other. So it's not like they're coming in and fighting, the number one contender, number two contender. So they're bringing their own audience. They're not taking away opportunities. And the one of the biggest things, it's similar to what you just said in terms of the content that supports it. Every single day, they're picking up a camera in some form and creating a video about themselves training, promoting the event. They're serving as that promotional vehicle. And that also takes a lot of work.
Now, let me tell you something that's going to really piss off boxing fans.
Sure.
This event, KSI and Logan Paul, is giving us an opportunity. It's not the other way around. We're actually going into their world, which is filled with hundreds and thousand times more fans than boxing will ever have. All right. So they're giving us a chance to say, hey, yo, here's your chance to come to our event. Okay, Mr. Eddie Hearn and Mr. Hardcore Boxing fans and Mr. Mass American Sports fan goers, and see what you like. Now, if even a couple of % of people watching, and I'm talking about the young generation, the 11, the 12, the 14-year-old kids, and get inspired by even one fight and say, hey, mom, dad, can you sign me up to the local boxing gym? That's what we need. We need more eyes on the sport. We need kids to get passionate and get enthusiastic about the sport so we can push it forward. So this is not by any means Matchroom and Eddie giving Logan Paul KSI exposure. Dude, they got that. We should take advantage of it.
We should, and definitely overall the credit to Eddie Hearn for taking, quote unquote risk or trying something new, just thinking outside of the box, right? That's the type of thinking we need to get out of the dark ages. So let's talk about the project that you are working on that's definitely made a splash all through social media. Break Media put out the casting call for fans, and then the poster was released, Dear Boxing. And so it's kind of been teased in a way, but obviously this is a good opportunity for you to tell fans a little bit more about it. So what is Dear Boxing?
So Dear Boxing was built on the very notion of why Break Media was built, which is, bring boxing back to the masses, one fighter at a time. But now it's going to be one documentary at a time. I feel like I've learned a lot in this sport, Karan. I've been in this sport long enough to understand not just how it works, but to see stuff behind the curtain, because I've been in professional prize fighting training camps. I've seen how managers interact with each other, and most of all, Karan, my background from TV and film, I understand what happens behind the closed doors of networks, and why the pay-per-view model exists, why network TV is still here, even though majority of the American population is not even watching TV. I understand all this stuff. And so on this documentary, I've included some really, really especially cool people, people from the network industry, people from the tech and data industry, people from the advertising industry. And we're all coming together just to kind of talk about, where did boxing stop? At what point did it stop? And at what point did the fans stop giving a shit about it? And so we kind of dig deep into that. So we took the fans and we fast forwarded to 2019, and we created a really cool social experiment just to see how much the American sports fan goer knows about boxing, and that was a really, really eye opener for me for sure.
Yeah, no, and that's what I want to ask you about next, Jay. So I think that boxing has a lot of fans that are very passionate about it, but it is a niche sport, and I think the issue is the mainstream only tunes in once in a while, and our goal is to make it a mainstream sport, right? So you had the experiment that you did with the big Sean Porter versus Errol Spence fight. That was a big fight for the welterweight division. That was on Fox. It had the Fox machine behind it in terms of marketing and promotion. So what was the social experiment that you did for that fight?
Well, first of all, did the numbers come out, Garn, about that pay-per-view? What's it sitting at now? I heard 250 or heard 300. What's the final
Yeah,
number?
I originally heard 300 on Twitter. Then the more recent one was in the 200 range. So I'm not sure where we landed. I'm guessing it's between 200 and 300,000 buys.
All right, so let me just educate those listeners who are listening right now a little quick education session here. So the pay-per-view model, for example, it's built on two streams, right? It's built on the domestic buys, which is the people actually at home who are clicking, I want to buy this fight. But then the majority of the buys are coming from the corporate buys. And the corporate buys are made up of sports bars and restaurants all across America. Now, here's a fun fact. When a restaurant or bar buys the pay-per-view, they're not just buying it once. Legally, they have to buy it for the max capacity of how many people are in this in the venue itself. So let's say Sam's Bar and Wings, they buy the pay-per-view. Like, they got to buy it, first of all, at a premium price. It's not $79.99. It's more than that. And they got to multiply it by how many seats are in the house, right? And then that number gets calculated and then put on the final number that they broadcast to all of us the next week. So here's the question. Is everybody in Sam's, Sports Bar and Wings there to watch the fight? I don't think so, but we have to find out. So what we did was we sent fans all across America from, for random cities across the country to go in during Spence and Porter to all the bars that was playing these fights and find out how many fans were actually there to watch this fight. And the feedback that I got is staggering, dude. Like 8 out of 10 people didn't know what the fuck was going on.
So people were, and I have heard that. I've heard, I've talked to bar owners when they're playing a big fight and they don't have the pay-per-view on. And then we say, hey, my group of friends who's there who are boxing fans will say, hey, we'll chip in, we'll get the pay-per-view. It's $80. We'll split that between us. Then they say, no, I've heard, it costs $2,000 plus for a venue or a restaurant to play the fight. Yep. So that part is true. I wasn't aware of the metrics part of it in terms of, multiplying by how many seats. But let's get into, you had people out there asking people in these bars, do you know who Sean Porter is? Do you know who Errol Spence is? Right? Is that's what you had?
Well, that's what we wanted to know. Because if they're publicly displaying, if the promoters and networks are, measuring, excuse my language, cock sizes on Monday, saying we did 350,000 buys, were there really 350,000 people watching this fight? Were there really, or was that number just, an extreme exaggeration of how many seats were in the house that night? So we have an entire social media team who calculated all the data that night from Google Analytics, from Facebook mentions, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok mentions of Spence and Porter. We added it all up, and then we have the final number that's going to be projected on, obviously, the documentary itself. And I hope that fans actually wake up and see what's going on. And see what's happening out there and see who's actually making up shit versus who's actually trying to take the sport seriously and just become a more educated fan.
Right. And you will, and just to play devil's advocate, one thing you do have to look at, it's probably smaller in scale, but if you look at something I used to do, have a lot of friends over to my house to watch a fight. So that's one buy, right? But then I have more eyeballs in that room. So that also plays a factor as well.
Yeah, of course. We cover that as well. Of course. I mean, we take care of everything on this doc, man. We take care of the illegal streamers. We take care of all the pizza parties that are happening on Saturday. And we're pretty fair with the data too. Now, once again, although this sounds like this documentary is against like the pay-per-view model, it isn't, because at the end of the day, boxing has become a bit of a pay-per-view specialty sport. And at the end of the day, I ask myself, I find myself asking, why is that? I mean, if FIFA doesn't require us to pay for the final games, if NBA Final Game 7 doesn't ask us to pay, if NHL Stanley Cups don't ask us to pay, if the Super Bowl doesn't ask us to pay, who the fuck is boxing to ask us to pay, $80 for Danny Garcia versus Errol Spence? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. So, and that's kind of to close it out. That's what I wanted to ask you, is that your mission here is not to shame boxing in any way. It's not to put down the sport. You want to bring up the sport, right? You want
I'm trying to make it more available to the masses, man. That's
right.
all it is. I'm a frustrated fan with a chip on its shoulder because of my experience in TV and film. That's what it is, dude. Like, I'm a passionate boxing fan. I want to bring it back to the masses, but how can we do that when we're charging prices for events that the average fan doesn't care about? An average fan doesn't know who Danny Garcia or Errol Spence is, man. Why are we hiding them behind the pay-per-view box? And it's like, bring it back to the masses. At the end of the day, who's actually watching these pay-per-views? It's just hardcore fans at the end of the day. And this is what the data will show you, that boxing is fueled by a couple of thousand hardcore boxing fans. It is not in the hands of the mainstream American sports fan, period.
Well, let's hope that, the ambitious plan to get boxing out of the dark ages and get the matchups we want and build the stars that we want and really get our sport back in the mainstream. Let's hope that happens, and good luck to you on that pursuit. So, Jay, but just to close it out, tell people where they can find you on social media and how they can connect with you.
Yeah, for sure. I like everybody's support who's listening. And if you feel like you want to be part of the documentary from a fan perspective or an expert perspective, feel free to drop me an email or just look me up on Twitter and Instagram. That's producer_JC.
Jay Chaudhry, co-founder of Break Media, award-winning producer, director, working on Dear Boxing, which hopes to shake up the status quo in boxing. Jay, thank you so much for your time and hope to talk to you soon.
All right, my brother. Thanks so much.
That is going to bring us to the end of this week's episode of Ask the Experts. I want to thank all of my guests: John Molina, Marcos Villegas, Sugar Hill, Avni, Yildirim, and Jay Chaudhry. I want to thank all these guys for being on the show. If you want to follow my personal accounts on Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, it's at Curran Bhatia, at CurranBhatia. That's on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. If you want to follow the podcast, it's on Twitter at ATE_podcast. Once again, that's ATE_podcast on Twitter. If you want to email the show, it's AskTheExpertsPod@gmail.com. If you like what we're doing, please go on iTunes, hit subscribe, leave a 5-star review. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you to my guests for being on the show. Until next time, this is Curran Bhatia signing off for Ask the Experts.